Hello and welcome back to reading Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 12 and Chapter 13. Let's review what's just happened. The last paragraph was, Mr. Linton, on his part, spent his time in the library and did not inquire concerning his wife's occupation, Isabella, and he had an hour's interview, during which he tried to elicit from her some sentiment of proper horror for Heathcliff's advances. Okay. But he could make nothing of her evasive replies, and was now obligated to close the examination unsatisfactorily, adding, however, a solemn warning that if she were so insane as to encourage that worthless suitor, it would dissolve all bonds of relationship between herself and him. Okay, Chapter 12. While Mrs. Linton moped around about the park and garden, always silent and almost always in tears, and her brother shut himself up among books that had never opened, wearing, I guessed, with continual vague expectation that Catherine, repenting her conduct, would come of her own accord to ask pardon and seek a reconciliation, and she fasted pertinaciously under the idea, probably, that at every meal Edgar was ready to choke for her absence, and pride alone held her from running to cast himself at her feet. I went about my household duties, convinced that the Grange had but one sensible soul in its walls, and that lodged in my body. I wasted no condolences on Miss, nor any expostulations on my mistress, nor did I pay any attention to the sighs of my master, who yearned to hear his lady's name, since he might not hear her voice. I determined they should come about as they pleased for me, and though it was a tiresomely slow process, I began to rejoice at length in the faint dawn of its progress, as I thought at first. Mrs. Linton, on the third day, unbarred her door, and having furnished the water in her pitcher and decanters, desired a renewed supply and a basin of gruel, for she believed she was dying. That I sit down as a speech meant for Edgar's ears, I believed no such thing, so I kept it to myself, and brought her some tea and dry toast. She ate and drank eagerly, and sank back on her pillow again, clenching her hands and groaning. "Oh, I will die," she exclaimed. "Since no one cares anything about me, I wish I had not taken that." And then a good while after I heard her murmur, "No, I'll not die. He'll be glad. He does not love me at all. He would never miss me." "Did you want anything, ma'am?" I inquired, still preserving my external composure in spite of her ghastly countenance and strange exaggerated manner. "What is this apathetic being doing?" she demanded, pushing the thick and tangled locks from her wasted face. "Has he fallen into a lethargy, or is he dead?" "Neither," replied I. "If you mean Mr. Linton, he's tolerably well, I think, though his studies occupy him rather more than they ought. He is continually among the books, since he has no other society." I should not have spoken so, if he had known her true condition, but I could not get rid of the notion she had acted a part of her disorder. "Among his books," she cried, unconfounded. "Am I dying? And I'm dying, and I dying. I on the brink of the grave. My God, does he know not I'm altered?" she continued, staring at the reflection in a mirror hanging against the opposite wall. "Is that Catherine Linton? He imagines me in a pet, in play perhaps. Cannot you inform him that it is frightful earnest? Nelly, if it be not too late, as soon as I learn how he feels, I'll choose between these two, either to starve at once. That would be no punishment, unless he had a heart, or to recover and leave the country. Are you speaking the truth about him now? Take care. Is he actually so utterly indifferent for my life?" "Why, ma'am," I answered, "the master has no idea of your being deranged, and of course he does not fear that you will let yourself die of hunger." "Why, you think not?" "Cannot you tell him I will?" she returned. "Persuade him. Speak of your own mind. Say you are certain I will." "No, you forget, Mrs. Linton," I suggested, "that you have eaten some food with a relish this evening, and tomorrow you will perceive its good effects." "If I were only sure it would kill him," she interrupts, "I'd kill myself directly. These 3 awful nights I've never closed my lids, and oh, I've been tormented, I've been haunted, Nelly. But I begin to fancy you don't like me. How strange! I thought Though everybody hated and despised each other, they could not avoid me, and they have all turned to enemies in a few hours. They have, I'm positive. The people here, how dreary to meet death, surrounded by the cold faces. Isabella, terrified and repelled, afraid to enter the room. It would be so dreadful to watch Catherine go, and Edgar standing solemnly by to see it over, then offering prayers to thanks to God for restoring peace to his house, and going back to the books. What in the name of all that feels has he to do with books when I am dying? She could not bear the notion which I had put into her head, and Mr. Linton's philosophical resignation, tossing about her, increased her feverishness and bewilderment to madness, and tore the pillow with her teeth. Then, raising herself up all burning, desired that I would open the window. We were in the middle of winter. The wind blew strong from the northeast. I objected, but both the expression flitting over her face and the changes of her mood began to alarm me terribly, and brought to my recollection her former illness, and the doctor's injunction that she should not be crossed. A minute previous she was violent, and now supported on one arm, and not noticing my refusal to obey her, she seemed to find childish diversion in pulling the feathers from the rents she had just made, and arranging them on the sheet according to her different species. Her mind had strayed to other associations. That's a turkey, she mumbled to herself, and this is a wild duck, and that's a pigeon, and they put pigeon feathers in the pillow. No wonder I couldn't die. Let me take care to throw it on the pillow, and I lie down, and here is a moorcock's, and this I should know it among 1,000. It's a lapwing's booty bird, wheeling over our heads in the middle of the moor. It wanted to get its nest when the clouds touched the swells, and it felt rain coming. The feather was picked up from the heath. The bird was not shot. In the heath, the bird was not shot. We saw its nest in the winter, full of little skeletons. Heathcliff sat a trap over it, and the old ones dare not come. I made him promise he'd never shoot a lapwing after that, and he didn't. Yes, here are more. Did he shoot my lapwings, Nellie? Are there red, any of them? Look at me. Or let me look. Give over with that baby work, I interrupted, dragging the pillow away and turning the holes toward the mattress, for she was removing its contents by handfuls. Lie down and shut your eyes. You're wondering, there's a mess. The down is flying about like snow. I went here and there collecting it. I see in you, Nellie, she continued dreamily, an aged woman. You have gray hair and bent shoulders. This bed is the fairy cave of Penistone Crag, and you are gathering elf bolts to hurt our heifers, pretending, while I am near, that they are only locks of wool. That's what you'll come to 50 years hence. I know you are not so now. I'm not wondering you're mistaken, or else I should believe you really were with withered hag, and I should think I was the Penistone Crag. And I'm conscious it's night, and there are 2 candles on the table making the black press shine like jet. The black press, where is that? I asked. You are talking in your sleep. It's against the wall, as it always is, she replied. It does appear odd. I see a face in it. There is no press in the room, and never was, said I, resuming my seat and lifting up the curtain that I might watch her. Don't you see the face? She inquired, gazing earnestly at the mirror, and say what I could. I was incapable of making her comprehend it to be her own, so I rose and covered it with a shawl. It's behind there still, she pursued anxiously, and it stirred. Who is it? I hope it will not come out when you are gone. Oh, Nellie, that room is haunted. I'm afraid of being alone. I took her hand in mine and bid her be composed, for a succession of shoulders convulsed her frame, and she would keep straining her gaze toward the glass. There's nobody here, I insisted. It was yourself, Mrs. Linton. You knew it a while since. Myself, she gasped, and the clock is striking 12. It's true, then. That's dreadful. Her fingers clutched the clothes and gathered them over her eyes. I attempted to steal to the door with an intention of calling her husband, but I was summoned back by a piercing shriek. The shawl had dropped from the frame. "Why, what is the matter?" cried I. "Who is the coward now? Wake up! This is the glass, the mirror, Mrs. Linton, and you see yourself in it, and there am I, too, by your side, trembling and bewildered." She held me fast, but the horror gradually passed from her countenance. Its paleness gave place to a shadow of shame, a glow of shame. "Oh dear, I thought I was at home," she sighed. "I thought I was lying in my chamber at Wuthering Heights. Because I'm weak, my brain got confused, and I screamed unconsciously. Don't say anything, but stay with me. I dread sleeping. My dreams appall me." "A sound sleep would do you good, ma'am," I answered, "and I hope this suffering will prevent you trying starving again." "Oh, if I were but in my own bed in this house," she went on bitterly, wringing her hands, "and that wind sounding in the firs by the lattice. Do let me feel it. It comes straight down the moor. Do let me have one breath." To pacify her, I held a casement ajar a few seconds. A cold blast rushed through it. I closed it and returned to my post. She lay still now, her face bathed in tears. Exhaustion of her body had entirely subdued her spirit. Our fiery Catherine was no better than a wailing child. "How long is it since I shut myself in here?" she asked, suddenly reviving. "It was Monday evening," I replied, "and this is Thursday night, or rather Friday morning at present." "What, of the same week?" she exclaimed. "Only that brief time, long enough to live on nothing but cold water and ill temper," observed I. "Well, it was a weary number of hours," she muttered doubtfully. "It must be more. I remember being in the parlor after they had quarreled, and Edgar being cruelly provoking, and me running into this room desperate. As soon as I ever had barred the door, utter blackness overwhelmed me, and I fell on the floor. I couldn't explain to Edgar how certain I felt of having a fit or going raging mad if he persisted in teasing me. I had no command of tongue or brain, and he did not guess my agony. Perhaps it barely left my sense to try to escape from him, and his voice, before I recovered sufficiently to see and hear it, began to be dawn. Nellie, I'll tell you what I thought, and what was kept occurring and recurring until I feared for my reason. I thought, as I lay there with my head against the table leg and my eyes dimly discerning the gray square of the window, that I was enclosed in the oak-panelled bed at home, and my head ached with some great grief which, just waking, I could not recollect. I pondered and worried myself to discover what it could be, and almost strangely the whole last 7 years of my life grew a blank. I did not recall that had they been at all. I had a child. My father was just buried, and my misery arose from the separation that Hindley had ordered between me and Heathcliff. I was laid alone for the first time, rousing from a dismal doze after a night of weeping. I lifted my hand to push the panels aside. It struck the tabletop. I swept it along the carpet, and then memory burst in. My late anguish was swallowed in a paroxysm of despair. I cannot say why I felt so wildly wretched. It must have been temporary derangement, for there is scarcely cause. But supposing at 12 years old I could have been wrenched from this height, and every early association, and my all in all, as Heathcliff was at time, and been converted at a stroke into Miss Linton, the lady of Thrushcross Grave, and the wife of a stranger, an exile, and outcast thenceforth from what had been my world, you may fancy a glimpse of the abyss where I grovelled. Shake your head as you will, Nellie. You have helped to unsettle me. You should have spoken to Edgar. Indeed, you should, and compelled him to leave me quiet. Oh, I'm burning. I wish I were out of doors. I wish I were a girl again, half savage and hardy and free, and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. Why am I so changed? Why does my blood rush into my head of tumult at a few words? I am sure I should be myself were I once among the heather of those hills. Open the window again wide, fasten and open. Quick, why don't you move? Because I won't give you your death of cold, I answered. You won't give me a chance of life, you mean, she said suddenly. However, I'm not hopeless yet. I'll open it myself. And sliding down from the bedding, before I could hinder her, she crossed the room, walking very uncertain through it, back and bent out, careless of the frosty air that cut about her shoulder as keen as a knife. I entreated and finally attempted to force her to retire, but I soon found she was delirious, straying much surpassed mine. She was delirious. I became convinced of her subsequent actions and ravings. There was no moon, and everything beneath lay in misty darkness. Not a light gleamed from any house, far or near. All had been extinguished, and those long ago, and those at Wuthering Heights never visible. And she asserted she caught their shining. "Look," she cried eagerly, "that's my room with the candle in it, and the trees swaying before it, and the other candle is in Joseph's garret. Joseph sits up late, doesn't he? He's waiting till I come home, that he may lock the gate. Well, he's waiting a while yet. It's a rough journey and a sad heart to travel it, and we must pass by Gimmerton Kirk to go that journey. We've braved its ghosts often together and dared each other to stand among the graves and ask them to come. But Heathcliff, if I dare you now, will you venture? If you do, I'll keep you. If not, I'll not lie there by myself. They may bury me 12 feet deep, and now the church down over me. Throw the church down over me, but I won't rest till you are with me. I never will." She paused and resumed with a strange smile. "He's considering. He'd rather I'd come with him. Find a way, then, not through that kirkyard. You are slow. Be content you always followed me." Perceiving it vain to argue against her insanity, I was planning how I could reach something to wrap about her without quitting my hold of herself, for I could not trust her alone by the gaping lattice, when to my consternation I heard the rattle of the door handle and Mr. Linton entered. He had only then come from the library, and in passing through the lobby had noticed our talking and been attracted by curiosity, feared to examine what its significance at the late hour. "Oh, sir," I cried, checking the exclamation risen to his lips at the sight which met him, the bleak atmosphere of the chamber. "The poor mistress is ill, and she quite masters me. I cannot manage her at all. Pray come and persuade her to get her to bed. Forget your anger, for she's hard to guide any way but her own." "Catherine ill!" he said, hastening the window. "Shut the window, Ellen. Catherine, why?" He was silent. The haggardness of Mrs. Linton's appearance smote him speechless, and he could only glance from her to me in a horrified astonishment. "She's been fretting him," I continued, "and eating scarcely anything, that never complaining. She would admit none of us till this evening. None of this till this evening. And so couldn't inform you of her state, as we were not aware of it ourselves, but it is nothing." I felt I uttered my examinations awkwardly. The master frowned. "It is nothing, is it, Ellen Dean?" she said sternly. "You shall account more clearly for keeping me ignorant of this." And he took his wife in his arm and looked at her with anguish. At first she gave him no glance of recognition. He was invisible to her abstract rays. The delirium was not fixed, however. Having weaned her eyes from contemplating the outer darkness, by degrees she centered her attention on him and discovered who it was that held her. "Ah, you are come, are you, Edgar Linton?" she said with angry animation. "You are one of those things that are ever found when they least wanted, and when you are wanted, never. I suppose we shall have plenty of lamentations. Now, I see we shall. But they can't keep me from my narrow home out yonder, my resting place where I'm bound before spring chapel roof. No, where I'm bound before spring is over. There is not among the Lintons, mind, under the chapel roof, but in the open air with the headstone, and you may please yourself whether you go to them or come to me." "Catherine, what have you done?" commenced the master. "Am I nothing to you any more? Do you love that wretch, Heth?" "Hush!" cried Mrs. Linton. "Hush this moment. You mention that name, and I am the matter instantly by spring from the window. What you touch at present you may have, but my soul will be on the hilltop before you lay hands on me again. I don't want you, Edgar. I'm past wanting you. Return to your books. I'm glad your possess a consolation, for all you had in me is gone. Her mind wanders, sir, I interposed. She has been talking nonsense the whole evening, but let her have quiet and proper attendance, and she'll rather rally. Hereafter we must be cautious how we vex her. I desire no further advice from you, answered Mr. Linton. You knew the mistress' nature and encouraged me to harass her and not to give me one hint of how she has been these last 3 days. It was heartless. Months of sickness could not cause such a change. I began to defend myself, thinking it too bad to be blamed for another's wicked waywardness. I knew Mrs. Linton's nature had been headstrong and domineering, cried I, but I didn't know that you wished to foster her fierce temper. I didn't know that to cure her I should wink at Mr. Heathcliff. I performed the duty of a faithful servant in telling you, and I had got faithful servant's wages. Well, it will teach me to be careful next time. Next time you will gather intelligence for yourself. The next time you will bring a tale to me, you shall quit my service, Ellen Dean, he replied. You'd rather hear nothing about it, I suppose, then, Mr. Linton, said I. Heathcliff has your permission to come according to Miss, and to drop in at every opportunity your absence offers on purpose to poison the mistress against you? Confused as Catherine was, her wits were alert as applying our conversation. Ah, Nelly has played traitor, she exclaimed passionately. Nelly is my hidden enemy, you witch. So you do see, elf bolts to hurt us. Let me go, and I'll make her rue. I'll make her howl a recantation. A maniac's fury kindled under her brow. She struggled desperately to disengage herself from Linton's arms. I felt no inclination to tarry the event, and resolving to seek medical aid on our own responsibility, I quitted the chamber. In passing the garden to reach the road at a place where a brindle hook is driven into the wall, I saw something white moved irregularly, evidently by another agent of the wind. Notwithstanding my hurry, I tried to examine it, lest ever after I should have the conviction impressed on my imagination that it was a creature of the other world. My surprise and perplexity was great to discover, by touch more than vision, Miss Isabella's Springer, Fanny, suspended by to a handkerchief and nearly at its last gasp. I quickly released the animal and lifted it into the garden. I had seen it follow its mistress upstairs when she went to bed. I wondered much how it could have gotten out there, and what mischievous person had treated it so. While untying the knot around the hook, it seemed to me that I repeatedly caught the beat of horses' feet galloping at some distance, but there were such a number of things to occupy my reflections that I hardly gave the circumstance a thought, though it was a strange sound in that place at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Kenneth was strangely just issuing from his house to see a patient in the village as I came up the street, and my account of Catherine Linton's malady included him to accompany me back immediately. He was a plain, rough man, and he made no scruple to speak his doubts of her surviving the second attack, unless she were more submissive to his directions than she had shown herself before. Nelly Dean, said he, I can't help fancying there's an extra cause for this. What has there been to do at the Grange? We've odd reports of here. A stout, hearty lass like Catherine does not fall ill for a trifle, and that sort of people could not either. It's hard work being them through fevers and such things. How did it begin? The master will inform you, I answered, but you are acquainted with the Earnshaw's violent disposition, and Mr. Linton's caps them all. I must say this, it commends in a quarrel. She was struck during a tempest of passion with a kind of fit, that's her account at least, for she flew off in the height of it, and locked herself up. Afterwards she refused to eat, and now she alternatively raves and remains in half-dream, knowing those about her, but having her mind filled with all sorts of strange ideas and illusions. Mr. Linton will be sorry, observed Kenneth interrogatively. Sorry, he'll break his heart would anything happen, I replied. Don't alarm him more than necessary. Well, I told him to beware, said my companion, and he must bide the consequences of neglecting my warning. Hasn't he been thick with Mr. Heathcliff lately? Heathcliff frequently visits the Grange, I answered I, though more on the strength of the mistress having known him present when a boy, than because the master likes his company. At present he's discharged from the trouble of calling, owing to some presumptuous aspirations after Miss Linton, which he manifested. I hardly think he'll be taken in again. And does Miss Linton turn a cold shoulder on him? That was the doctor's next question. I'm not in her confidence, returned I, reluctant to continue the subject. No, she's a sly one, he remarked, shaking her head. She keeps her own counsel, but she's a real little fool. I have it from good authority that last night, and a pretty night it was, she and Heathcliff were walking in the plantation at the back of your house among 2 hours, and he pressed her not to go in again, but just mount his horse and away with him. My informant said she could only put him off by pledging her word to honor to be prepared for a first meeting after that, when it was to be heard. He didn't hear, but you urged Mr. Limpton to look sharp. The news filled me with fresh tears. I outstripped Kenneth and ran most of the way back. The little dog was yelping in the garden, yet I spared a minute to open the gate for it, but insisted of going to the house door. It coursed up and down, snuffing the grass, and would have escaped to the road had I not seized and conveyed it in with me. On ascending to Isabella's room, my suspicions were confirmed. It was empty. Had I been a few hours sooner, Miss Linton's illness might have arrested her rash step, but what could be done now? There was a bare possibility of overtaking them if I pursued instantly. I could not pursue them, however, and I dare not rouse the family and fill the place with confusion, and still less unfold the business to my master, absorbed as he was in the present calamity, and having no heart to spare from second grief. I saw nothing for it but to hold my tongue and suffer matters to take their course. And Kenneth being arrived, I went with a badly composed countenance to announce him. Catherine lay in a troubled sleep. Her husband had succeeded in soothing the access of frenzy. He now hung over the pillow, watching every shade and every change of her painful expressive features. The doctor, on examining the case for herself, spoke hopefully to him of its having a favorable examination, if we could only persevere around her perfect and constant tranquillity. To me, he signified the threatening danger was not so much death as permanent alienation of intellect. I could not close my eyes at night, nor did Mr. Linton. Indeed, we never went to bed, and the servants were all up long before the usual hour, moving through the house with stealthy tread, and exchanging whispers as they encountered each other in their vocations. Each one was active but Miss Isabella, and they began to remark how sound she slept. Her brother, too, asked if she had risen, and seemed impatient for her presence, and hurt that she showed so little anxiety for her sister-in-law. I trembled lest he should send me to call her, but I was spared the pain of being the first proclamant of her fight. One of the maids, a thoughtless girl, who had been on an early errand to Glimmerton, came panting upstairs, open-mouthed, and dashed into the chamber, crying, "Oh, dear, dear, what mum we have next, master, our young lady!" "Hold your noise," cried I hastily, enraged at her clamorous manner. "Speak lower, Mary. What is the matter?" said Mr. Linton. "What ails you, your young lady?" She's gone. Young Heathcliff's run off with her," grasped the girl. "That is not true," exclaimed Linton, rising in agitation. "It cannot be. How has the idea entered your head? Ellen Dean, go and seek her. It is incredible. It cannot be." As he spoke, he took her servant to the door, and then he repeated his demand to know her reason for such an assertion. Why, I met on the road a lad that fetches milk here, she stammered, and he asked whether we were in trouble at the Grange. He thought he saw the miss's sickness, so I answered yes. Then he said there's somebody gone after him, I guess. I started. He said I knew naught about it, and he told her a gentleman and lady had stopped to have a horse's shoe fastened to the blacksmith shop 2 miles out of Gimmerton not very long after midnight, and now the blacksmith's lass had got up to spy who were there. She knew them both directly, and she noticed the man Heathcliff it was. She felt certain nobody could mistake him. Besides, put a sovereign in his father's hand for payment. The lady had a cloak about her face, and having desired a sup of water while she drank, it fell back. Then she saw her very plain. Heathcliff held both bridles as she rode on, and they set her faces from the village and went as fast as they rough roads would let them. The lass said nothing to her father, but she told it all over Gimmerton this morning. I ran and peeped for form's sake into Isabella's room, confirming when I turned the servant's statement. Mr. Linton had resumed his seat by the bed. On my re-entrance, he raised his eyebrow, read the meaning of the blank aspect, and dropped them without giving an order or uttering a word. Are we to try any measures for overtaking and bringing her back? I inquired. How should we do? She went on her own accord, answered the master. She had a right to go as she pleased. Trouble me no more about her. Hereafter she is only my sister in name, not because I disown her, but because she has disowned me. And that was all he said on the subject. He did not make a single inquiry further or mention her in any way, except directing me to send what property she had in the house to her fresh home, wherever it was, when I knew it. Chapter 13. For 2 months the fugitive remained absent. In those 2 months Mrs. Linton encountered and concurred the worst shock of what was denominated a brain fever. No mother could have nursed an only child more devotedly than Edgar tended her. Day and night he was watching and patiently enduring all the annoyances that irritable nerves and a shaken reason could inflict, and though Kenneth remarked that they had saved from the grave would only recompense his care by forming the source of constant future anxiety, in fact that his health and strength were being sacrificed to preserve a mere ruin of humanity, he knew no limits in gratitude and joy. When Catherine's life was declared out of danger, and hour after hour he would sit beside her, tracing the gradual return of bodily health and flattering his too sanguine hopes with the illusion that her mind would settle back to its right balance also, and she would soon be entirely her former self. The first time she left her chamber was at the commencement of the following March. Mr. Linton had put on her pillow in the morning a handful of golden crocuses. Her eye, long stranger to any gleam of pleasure, caught them in waking, and shone delight as she gathered them eagerly together. These are the earliest flowers and the heights, she exclaimed. They remind me of the soft thaw winds and warm sunshine and nearly melted snow. Edgar, is there not a south wind, and is not the snow almost gone? The snow is quite gone down here, darling, replied her husband, and I only see 2 white spots on the whole range of moors. The sky is blue, and the larks are singing, and the becks and brooks are brimful. Catherine, last spring at this time I was longing to have you under this roof. Now I wish you were a mile or 2 up those hills. The air blows so sweetly, I feel that it would cure you. I shall never be there, but once more, said the invalid, and then you'll leave me, and I shall remain forever. Next spring you'll long again to have me under this roof, and you'll look back and think you were happy today. Linton lavished on her kindest caresses, and tried to cheer her by the fondest words, but vaguely regarding the flower, she let the tears collect on her lashes and stream down the cheek unheeding. We knew she were really better, and therefore decided that long confinement to a single place produced much of this despondency, and it might be partially removed by a change of scene. The master told me to light a fire in many weeks' deserted parlor. In the many weeks' deserted parlor. and to sit in an easy chair in the sunshine by the window. And then he brought her down, and she sat a long while enjoying the genial heat, and as we expected, revived by the objects around her, which, though familiar, were free from the dreary associations investing her hatred's chamber. By evening she seemed greatly exhausted, yet no arguments could persuade her to return to her apartment, that I had to arrange the parlor sofa for her till another bedroom could be prepared. To obviate the fatigue of mounting and descending the stairs, we fitted up this, where you lie at present, on the same floor with the parlor, and she was soon strong enough to move from one to the other, leaning on Edgar's arm. Ah, I thought myself, she might recover, so waited on as she was, and there was double cause to desire it for on her existence depended that on another. We cherished the hope that in a little while Mr. Linton's heart would be gladdened and his hands secured by a stranger's gripe by the birth of an heir. I should mention that Isabella sent to her brother some 6 weeks from her departure a short note announcing her marriage with Heathcliff. It appeared dry and cold, but at the bottom were dotted in pencil an obscure apology and an entreaty for kind remembrance and reconciliation, if her proceeding had offended him, asserting that she could not help it then, and being done she had now no power to repeal it. Linton did not reply to this, I believe, and in a fortnight more it got a long letter which I considered odd, coming from the pen of a bride just out of the honeymoon. I'll read it, for I keep it yet. Any relic of the dead is precious, if they were valued living. Dear Ellen, it begins, I came last night to Wuthering Heights, and heard for the first time that Catherine has been and is yet very ill. I must not write to her, I suppose, and my brother is either too angry or too distressed to answer what I sent him. Still, I must write to somebody, and the only choice left me is you. Inform Edgar that I'd give the world to see his face again, that my heart returned to Thrushcross Grange in 24 hours after I left it, and is there at this moment full of warm feelings for him and Catherine. I can't follow it, though. Those words are underlined. They need not expect me, and they may draw what conclusion they please, taking care, however, to lay nothing at the door of my weak will or deficient action. The remainder of this letter is for you alone. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, how did you contrive to present the common sympathies of human nature when you resided here? I cannot recognize any sentiment which those around share with me. The second question I have great interest in it is this: is Mr. Heathcliff a man? If so, is he mad? And is he a devil? I shan't tell my reasons for making this inquiry, but I beseech you to explain, if you can, what I have married. That is, when you call to see me, and you must call Ellen very soon. Don't write, but come and bring me something from Edgar. No, you shall hear how I have been received in this home, as I am led to imagine the Heights will be. It is to amuse to myself that I dwell on such subjects as the lack of external comforts that never occupy my thoughts, except for the moment when I miss them. I should laugh and dance for joy if I found their absence was a total of my miseries, and the rest was an unnatural dream. The sun behind the Grange as we turned on the moors, by that I judged to be 6 o'clock, and my companion halted half an hour to inspect the park and the gardens, and probably the place itself, as well as he could, so it was dark when we dismounted in a paved yard of the farmhouse, and your old fellow servant Joseph issued out to receive us by the light of a dim candle. He did it with courtesy that redounded to his credit. This first act was to alleviate his torch to a level with my face, squint malignantly, project his under lip, and turn away. Then he took the 2 horses and led them into the stables, reappearing for the purpose of locking the outer gate, as if we lived in the ancient castle. Heathcliff stayed to speak to him as I entered a kitchen, a dingy, untidy hole. I dare say you would not know it. It is so unchangeable since it was in your charge, By the fire stood a ruffianly child, strung in limb and dirty in garb, with the look of Catherine in his eyes and about his mouth. This is Edgar's legal nephew, I reflected, mine in a matter. I must shake hands, and yes, I must kiss him. It is a right to establish a good understanding at the beginning. I approached, and attempting to make his chubby fist, said, "How do you do, my dear?" He replied in jargon I did not comprehend. "Shall I and be friends, Hareton?" was my next essay at conversation. An oath and a treat to set Throttler on me I did not frame off, rewarded my perseverance. "Hey, Throttler, lad," whispered the little wretch, rousing a half-bred bulldog from his lair in a corner. "Now wilt to be gaining?" he asked authoritatively. Love for the life urged to compliance. I stepped over the threshold to wait till the others should enter. Mr. Heathcliff was nowhere visible, and Joseph, whom I followed to the stables and requested to accompany me in, after staring and muttering to himself, screwed on his nose and replied, "Did I ever Christian body out like it? Minching and munchin'. I cannot tell you what you say." "I say, I wish you to come with me to the house," I cried, thinking him deaf, yet highly disgusted at his rudeness. Ooh. It's a long letter. "Nor to me, I gotten summat else to do," he answered, and continued his work, moving his lantern jaws meanwhile, and surveying my dress and countenance, the former a great deal too fine, but the latter, I assure, as sad as he could desire. With sovereign contempt, I walked round the yard and through a wicket to another door, at which I took the liberty of knocking in hopes some more civil servant might show himself, and a short suspense, it was opened by a tall, gaunt man, without neckerchief, and otherwise extremely slovenly. His features were lost in masses of shaggy hair that hung on his shoulders, and his eyes, too, were like a ghastly Catherine's, with all her beauty annihilated. "What's your business here?" he demanded grimly. "Who are you?" "My name was Isabella Linton," I replied. "You've seen me before, sir. I am lately married to Mr. Heathcliff, and he has brought me here, I suppose, by your permission." "Is he come back, then?" asked the hermit, glaring like a hungry wolf. "Yes, we came just now," I said, "but he left me to the kitchen door, and when I would have gone in, your little boy played sentinel over the place and frightened me off the help of a bulldog." "It's well the hellish villain has kept his word," growled my future host, searching the darkness beyond me in expectation of discovering Heathcliff, and then he indulged in a soliloquy of execrations and threats of what he would have done had the fiend deceived him. I repented having tried the second entrance, and was almost inclined to slip away before he finished cursing, but ere I could execute that intention, he ordered me in and shut and refastened the door. There was a great fire, and that was all the light in the huge apartment, whose floor had a crown of uniform gray, and the once brilliant pewter dishes which used to attract my gaze when I was a girl partook of a similar obscurity created by tarnish and dust. I inquired whether I might call the maid and be conducted to a bedroom. Mr. Earnshaw vouchsafed no answer. He walked up and down with his hands in his pocket, apparently quiet, forgetting my presence in his abstraction, was evidently so deep in his whole aspect, so misanthropical, that I shrank from disturbing him again. You'll not be surprised, Ellen, at the feeling particularly cheerless, seated in mirth and solitude on that inhospitable hearth, and remembering that 4 miles distant lay my delightful home, containing the only people I loved on earth, and there might as well be the Atlantic to part us. Instead of those 4 miles, I could not overpass them. I questioned with myself, where must I turn for comfort? And mind you don't tell Edgar or Catherine about every sorrow beside their rose preeminent despair at finding nobody who could or would be my ally against Heathcliff. I had sought shelter at Wuthering Heights almost gladly, because I was secured by the arrangement from living alone with him. But he knew the people we were coming against, and he could not fear their intermeddling. I sat and thought a doleful time. The clock struck 8 or 9, and still my companion paced to and fro, his head bent to his breast, and perfectly silent, unless a groan or a bitter ejaculation forced itself out at intervals. I listened to detect a woman's voice in the horse, and filled the interim with wild regrets and dismal anticipation, which at last spoke audibly, yet In irrepressible sighing and weeping, I was not aware how openly I grieved, till Earnshaw halted opposite in his measured walk, and gave me a stare of newly awakened surprise. Taking advantage of his recovered attention, I exclaimed, "I am tired of my journey, and I want to go to bed. Where is the maidservant? Direct me to her, as she won't come to me." "We have none," he answered. "You must wait on yourself." "Where must I sleep, then?" I sobbed. I was beyond regarding self-respect, weighed down by fatigue and wretchedness. "Joseph will show you Heathcliff's chamber," said he. "Open that door. He's in there." I was going to obey, but he suddenly arrested me and added in the strongest tone, "Be so good as to turn your lock and bolt your door. Don't admit it." "Well," I said, "by why, Mr. Earnshaw?" I did not relish the notion of deliberately fastening myself in with Heathcliff. "Look here," he replied, pulling from his waistcoat a curiously constructed pistol, having a double-edged spring knife attached to its barrel. "That's a great temper to a desperate man, is it not? I cannot resist going up with this every night and trying this door. If once I find it open, he's done for. I do it invariably, even though the minute before I have been recalling 100 reasons that should make me refrain. It is some devil that urges me to thwart my own schemes by killing him. Yet fight against that devil. You fight against that devil for love as long as you may. When the time comes, not all the angels in heaven shall save him." I surveyed the weapon inquisitively. A hideous notion struck me, how powerful I should be possessing such an instrument. I took it from his hand and touched the blade. He looked astonished at the expression my face assumed. During a brief second, it was not horror, it was covetousness. He snatched his pistol back jealously, shut the knife, and returned to its concealment. "I don't care if you tell him," said he. "Put him on his guard, and watch for him. You know the terms we are on. I see his danger does not shock you. What had Heathcliff done to you?" I asked. "And what was he wronged you for warrant the appalling hatred? Wouldn't it be wiser to bid him quit the house?" "No," thundered Earnshaw. Should he offer to leave me, he's a dead man. Persuaded him to attempt it, and you are a murderess. Am I to lose all without a chance of revival? Is Harton to be a beggar? Oh, damnation, I will have it back, and I'll be his gold too, and then his blood, and hell shall have his soul. It will be 10 times darker with that guess than ever it was before." Blacker. "You've acquainted me, Ellen, with his old master's habits. He is clearly on the verge of madness. He was so last night, at least. I shudder to be near him, and though on his servant ill-bred moroseness as comparatively agreeable. He now recommenced his moody walk, and I raised the latch and escaped into the kitchen. Joseph was bending over the fire, peering into a large pan that swung above it, and a wooden bowl of oatmeal stood on the settle close by. The contents of the pan began to boil, and turned to plunge his hand into the bowl. I conjectured that his preparation was probably for our supper, and being hungry, I resolved it should be eatable, so crying out sharply, "I'll make the porridge!" I removed the vessel out of his reach, and proceeded to take off my hat and riding habit. "Mr. Earnshaw," I continued, "directs me to wait on him myself. I will. I'm not going to act the lady amongst you. For fear I should starve. "Good Lord," he muttered, sitting down and stroking his ribbed stockings from the knee up to the ankle. "If they's to be fresh other things, just when I'll gotten used to two maisters. If I'll mun have a mistress set o'er my head, it's like time to be flirting. I never did think to say today at all but love told place, but all that it's nigh at hand." This lamentation drew no notice from me. I went briskly to work, sighing to remember a period when I would have been all merry fun, but compelled speedily to drive off from the remembrance. It racked me to recall past happiness, and the greater peril there was of conjuring up its apparition. The quicker the thimble ran around, and the faster the handfuls of meal fell into the water. Joseph beheld my style of cookery with growing indignation. "There," he ejaculated, "Hareton, thou wilt sup thy porridge to-night. There'll be not above bud lump as big as my knave. There again, out flingin' bowl and all. If I were ya, there pale to gulp off then y'all had to wit. Bang, bang! It's a mercy the bottom isn't deeped at. It was rather a mess, though, I own. When poured into the basin, 4 has been provided, and a gallon pitcher of a new milk was brought from the dairy, which Hareton, seizing, commenced drinking and spilling from expansive lip. I expostulated and desired that he should have in his mug, affirming that I would not taste the liquid treated so dirtily. The old cynic chose to be vastly offended by a nicety, assuring me repeatedly that the barn was every bit as good as I, and every bit as wholesome, and wondering how I could fashion to be so conceited. Meanwhile, the infant ruffian continued sucking and glowering up at me defyingly as he slavered into the jug. I shall have my supper in another room, I said. Have you no place you called a parlour? Parlour, he echoed, sneering. Parlour. Nay, we na parlours. If you done it like we're company, your masters, if you done it like your masters, they's us. Then I shall go upstairs, I answered. Show me a chamber. I put my basin on a tray and went myself to fetch some more milk. Okay, grumbling, the fellow rose and preceded me in my ascent. We mounted to the garrets. We opened a door now and then to look into the apartments we passed. Here's a rum, he said, at last flinging back a cranky board on hinges. It's wheel enough to eat a few porridge in. There's a pack of corn in it to corner there meaterly clane. If y'ar feared you muckying your grand silk clothes, spread your handkerchief ut to top on't. The rum was a kind of lumber hole, smelling strong of malt and grain, various sacks of which articles were piled around, leaving a wide bare space in the middle. Why, man, I exclaimed, facing him angrily, this is not a place to sleep in. I wish to see my bedroom. Bedroom, he repeated in a tone of mockery. Yes, see all to bedroom. There is yon's mine. He pointed into the second garret, only differing from the first in being more naked about the walls and having large, low, curtainless bed with an indigo-colored quilt at one end. He pointed into the second garret, only different from the first in being more naked around the walls and having a large, low, curtainless bed with an indigo-colored quilt at one end. What do I want with yours? I retorted. I suppose Mr. Heathcliff does not lodge at the top of the house, does he? Oh, it's Mr. Heathcliff's you're wondering, cried he, as if making a new discovery. Couldn't ye ha' said it once? And then, how much I tell ye, but all this work, but that's just one ye cannot say. He alas keeps it locked, nobody ever mails on't but his You've a nice house, Joseph. I cannot refrain from observing unpleasant inmates, and I think that concentrates essence of all the madness in the world and took up its abode in my brain the day I linked my fate with theirs. However, that is not the present purpose. They are other rooms. For heaven's sake, be quick and let me settle somewhere. He made no reply to this adjuration, only plodding doggedly down the wooden steps, halting before an apartment which, from that halt and the superior quality of its furniture, I conjectured to be the best one. There was a carpet, a good one, but the pattern was obliterated. By dusk, a fireplace hung with cut paper dropping to pieces, a handsome oak bedspread with ample crimson curtains of rather expensive material and modern make, but they had evidently experienced rough usage. The valances hung in festoons, wrenched from the rings, and the iron rod supporting them was bent in an arc on one side, causing the drapery to trail upon the floor. The chair was also damaged, many of them severely, and deep indentations to form the panels of the walls. I was endeavoring to gather resolutions for entering and taking possession when my fool of a guide announced, "There he is, master." By the time was cold, my appetite gone and my patience exhausted. I insisted on being provided instantly with a phrase to refuge and means of repose. Where the devil began the religious elder. The Lord bless us, the Lord forgive us, for where the hell would ye gang? Ye marred wearisome nout. Ya seen all bud hertin bit of a chammer. There's not another whale to lig down in the house. I was so vexed I flung my tray and its contents on the ground, and then seated myself at the stairs head, hid my face in my hands, and cried, "Ech, ech, ech!" exclaimed Joseph. Well done, Miss Cathy, well done, Miss Cathy. Ever's the master Sal just tumble over them brocket pots. Under them we'll hear summat. We's here hides to be going for nothing maddling. Ye deserve pining for this Christmas, flowing into precious gifts of God, and to for ye place and rages. But I'm mistaken. If ye shrew ye spirit lang, will Heathcliff bide such bonny ways, think ye, and not wished ye much ye that Plisky, nubbed wished he may. And so we went scolding to his den beneath, taking the candle with him, and I remained in the dark. The period of reflection succeeding this silly action and compelled me to admit the necessity of smothering my pride and choking my warmth and bestirring beside to remove its effects. An unexpected aid presently appeared in the shape of Throttler, whom I now recognized as a son of our old sulker that had spent its whelphood at the Grange and was given to my father by Mr. Hindley. I fancy it knew me. It pushed its nose against mine by the way of salute, and then hastened to devour the porridge. I groped from step to step, collecting the shattered earthenware and drying the spatters of milk from the banister with my pocket handkerchief. Our labors were scarcely over when I heard Earnshaw tread in the passage. My assistant tucked in his tail and pressed to the wall. I stole in the nearest doorway. The dog's endeavor to avoid him was unsuccessful, as I guessed, but I scuttered downstairs in a prolonged piteous yelping. I had better luck. He passed on, entered his chamber, and shut the door. Directly after Joseph came up with Hurton to put him to bed, I had found shelter in Hurton's room, and the old man, on seeing me, said, "They's rum for both ya and your pride. Now I'd think I the has it's empty. Ya must eat it all to yourself, and him as a last makes a third. I sit your company." Gladly did I take advantage of his intimation, and the minute I flung myself into the chair by the fire, I nodded and slept. My slumber was deep and sweet, though over far too soon. Mr. Heathcliff awoke me. He had just come in, demanding in his loving manner what I was doing there. I told him the cause of my staying up so late, that he had the key of our room in his pocket, and objected the adjective "R" gave mortal offence. He swore it was not, nor ever shall be mine, but I'll not repeat his language, nor describe his habitual conduct. He is ingenious and unresting in seeking to gain my abhorrence. I sometimes wonder at which, with an intensity that dreadens my fears. Yet I assure you, a tiger or a venomous serpent could not rouse terror in me equally to that which he awakened. He told me of Catherine's illness, and accused my brother of causing it, promising that I should be Edgar's proxy in suffering until he could get a hold of him. I do not hate. I am wretched. I have been a fool. I do hate him. I am wretched. I have been a fool. Beware of uttering one breath of this to anyone at the Grange. I shall expect you every day. Don't disappoint me, Isabella. Chapter 14 for tomorrow.